Genesis chapter 10 verse 1. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood. This verse marks the beginning of a new section in the book of Genesis, commonly referred to as the Table of Nations or the generations of the sons of Noah. It provides a transition from the narrative of the flood and Noah's Ark to the subsequent account of the dispersion of humanity and the development of different nations. Context: Genesis chapter 10 follows the account of the flood and Noah's deliverance in the ark, described in Genesis 6-9. The world was destroyed due to mankind's wickedness, but Noah and his family were saved because of their righteousness. After the floodwaters receded, humanity was given a fresh start through the descendants of Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The generations of the sons of Noah. Genesis chapter 10 verse 1 introduces the subsequent narrative, which outlines the descendants of Noah's sons and their migration to various regions. It provides a genealogical record of the nations that emerged from these lineages and offers insights into the origins of different peoples. Shem, Ham, and Japheth, these three sons of Noah represent the ancestors of the entire human race after the flood. Their descendants are believed to have given rise to the various ethnic groups and nations that exist today. Shem is traditionally associated with the Semitic peoples, including the Israelites and other Middle Eastern groups. Ham is associated with various African nations, while Japheth is associated with European and some Asian populations. Sons born after the flood. Genesis chapter 10 verse 1 emphasizes that the sons of Noah had children after the flood, emphasizing the continuity of humanity. It signifies the start of a new era, where humanity began to multiply and spread across the earth, fulfilling God's command to be fruitful and multiply, given to Noah and his sons in Genesis chapter 9 verse 1. Overall, Genesis chapter 10 verse 1 serves as a transition verse, connecting the account of the flood and Noah's family to the subsequent narrative of human dispersion and the development of different nations. It sets the stage for understanding the diverse origins of the peoples of the earth. Genesis chapter 10 verse 2. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tiras. This verse is part of the genealogy of the sons of Noah, specifically focusing on the descendants of Japheth. It provides a list of the names of Japheth's sons. Gomer is mentioned in other parts of the Bible as well. In Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 6, Gomer is listed among the nations that will join the forces of Gog of Magog in the end times. Some scholars believe that Gomer represents the Sumerians or the people of the northern regions of Asia Minor. Magog is also mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 38 verses 2-3 and Revelation chapter 20 verses 7-8, where it is associated with a future invasion against God's people. While the exact identity of Magog is uncertain, it is generally understood to represent a nation or a people in the far north. Madai is believed to represent the Medes, who were an ancient Iranian people. The Medes played a significant role in ancient history, and their empire was later conquered by the Persians. Javan refers to the descendants of Javan, who are believed to be the Greeks. The term Javan is often used in the Bible to represent Greece or the Greek-speaking world. Tubal and Meshech are mentioned together in several verses throughout the Bible, including Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 2 and 39-1. They are generally associated with regions in Asia Minor, specifically modern-day Turkey. Some scholars identify Tubal with the Tobol River in Siberia and Meshech with the Muscovites or the people of Moscow. Tiras is less well known than the other sons of Japheth, and the exact identification of this group is uncertain. Some scholars suggest that Tiras might represent various peoples in the Mediterranean region. It is important to note that this verse primarily serves as a genealogical record, providing a list of the descendants of Japheth. These names reflect the diverse nations and peoples that emerged from the sons of Japheth, and some of them play significant roles in biblical prophecies concerning the end times. Genesis chapter 10 verse 3. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, and Japheth, and Togarmah. Context: Genesis chapter 10, also known as the Table of Nations, provides a genealogical account of the descendants of Noah after the flood. It lists the nations and peoples that descended from Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Genesis chapter 10 verse 3 specifically focuses on the descendants of Japheth, particularly the sons of Gomer. Gomer is mentioned as one of the sons of Japheth, who is one of the sons of Noah. The exact identification of the descendants of Gomer is debated among biblical scholars. However, some theories suggest that Gomer's descendants might have settled in the regions of modern-day Turkey, Armenia, and parts of Europe. Ashkenaz is listed as one of the sons of Gomer. The identification of Ashkenaz is also uncertain. In historical contexts, Ashkenaz has been associated with a people group in the region of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, or with a possible connection to the Scythians, an ancient nomadic people of Eurasia. Japheth is another son of Gomer mentioned in Genesis chapter 10 verse 3. Like Ashkenaz, the exact identification of Japheth is uncertain. Some theories propose a connection between Japheth and the people of Paphlagonia, an ancient region in northern Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Togarmah is the third son of Gomer mentioned in this verse. The descendants of Togarmah are associated with regions in Asia Minor, specifically the area of Armenia. Significance: the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10 serves to demonstrate the various people groups that emerged from the three sons of Noah, highlighting the diversity and spread of humanity after the flood. The mention of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Japheth, and Togarmah signifies the development of different lineages and nations, which would have played a role in shaping the ancient world. It's important to note that the identification of these ancient names and their modern-day counterparts can be challenging and subject to ongoing scholarly debate. Therefore, while there are theories about the potential locations and descendants associated with Gomer, Ashkenaz, Japheth, and Togarmah, the exact connections remain uncertain. This Bible study provides an overview of Genesis chapter 10 verse 3 and its context. Further research and study can delve deeper into the historical and cultural aspects surrounding these names and their significance in biblical genealogy. Genesis chapter 10 verse 4. And the sons of Javan, Elisha, and Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. Context: Genesis chapter 10, also known as the Table of Nations, provides a genealogy of Noah's descendants after the flood. It lists the descendants of Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Genesis chapter 10 verse 4 specifically focuses on the descendants of Japheth, Noah's son. Javan, the son of Japheth, is associated with the Greek people. Javan is considered the ancestor of the ancient Ionian Greeks and their maritime civilization. The name, Javan, is often used in the Bible to refer to Greece as a whole. Elisha is believed to refer to the island of Cyprus. The name Elisha can also be associated with the region of Greece known as Elis. It is worth noting that the identification of these ancient locations can sometimes be speculative. Tarshish is a name that appears multiple times in the Bible, and its exact location is uncertain. It is generally thought to refer to a distant place, often associated with maritime trade and known for its wealth. Tarshish is mentioned in connection with the Phoenicians and their maritime activities. Kittim is generally associated with the island of Cyprus and its surrounding regions. The term Kittim was sometimes used to refer to the broader area of the Mediterranean, including regions influenced by the Greeks. Dodanim. The identification of Dodanim is debated among scholars. Some suggest it refers to the island of Rhodes, while others propose it points to the region of Dodona in Greece. In summary, Genesis chapter 10 verse 4 provides a glimpse into the genealogy of Japheth's descendants, specifically Javan and his four sons, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. These names are often associated with ancient Greek and Mediterranean regions, reflecting the spread of humanity after the flood. Please note that the interpretation of these names and their associations with specific regions can vary among scholars and historians. Genesis chapter 10 verse 5. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their families, in their nations. Context: Genesis chapter 10, also known as the Table of Nations, provides a genealogy of the descendants of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These descendants became the various nations and peoples of the ancient world. Genesis chapter 10 verse 5 specifically focuses on the division of the isles of the Gentiles. Isles of the Gentiles. The term isles refers to coastal regions, islands, or maritime territories. In biblical times, it often denoted lands beyond the known territories, such as the islands and coastal regions of the Mediterranean, Aegean, and other seas. The Gentiles refer to the nations and peoples who were not part of the chosen people of Israel, the descendants of Abraham. Divided in their lands, this verse highlights the dispersion and division of the Gentile nations across different lands. The descendants of Noah's sons migrated and settled in various regions, establishing their own territories and cultures. It speaks to the diversity and multiplicity of nations that emerged from Noah's lineage. Every one after his tongue. This phrase emphasizes the linguistic diversity among the nations. As the descendants migrated and settled in different regions, they developed distinct languages that became associated with specific groups. This linguistic diversity played a role in defining the boundaries and identity of each nation. After their families, in their nations, the division of the isles of the Gentiles was based on family lines and clans. Each nation had its own family structure, cultural practices, and societal organization. These familial and national identities further contributed to the diversity among the nations. Key takeaways. Genesis chapter 10 verse 5 highlights the dispersion and division of the Gentile nations across different lands. It emphasizes the diversity of languages and cultures that emerged from Noah's descendants. The verse reflects the fulfillment of God's command to be fruitful and multiply, Genesis chapter 9 verse 1, as the earth was populated by various nations and peoples. This passage underscores the sovereignty and providence of God in orchestrating the spread of humanity across the earth. Overall, Genesis chapter 10 verse 5 presents a picture of the early post-flood world, illustrating how different nations and languages came into existence through the descendants of Noah. It emphasizes the diversity of human cultures and highlights God's plan to populate the earth with various nations. Genesis chapter 10 verse 6. And the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mizraim, and Phut, and Canaan. Genesis chapter 10 verse 6 is part of the Table of Nations, which provides a genealogical account of Noah's descendants after the flood. In this verse, we encounter the sons of Ham, who was one of Noah's 3 sons. Ham's brothers were Shem and Japheth. The verse lists 4 sons of Ham: Cush, Mizraim, Phut, and Canaan. Each of these names represents different peoples and nations that descended from Ham. Cush is often associated with the land of Ethiopia or regions in Africa. The descendants of Cush likely inhabited areas in present-day Sudan, Ethiopia, and possibly other regions of Africa. Mizraim is believed to be a reference to Egypt. The descendants of Mizraim are associated with the Egyptian civilization and its various branches. Phut. The identity of Phut and his descendants is not entirely clear. Some scholars suggest that they were located in North Africa, possibly corresponding to modern-day Libya or adjacent regions. Canaan refers to the land of Canaan, which became the ancestral homeland of the Canaanite people. The Canaanites occupied the territory encompassing modern-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and parts of Jordan. This verse serves as a foundation for understanding the historical and geographical origins of these nations and peoples. The subsequent verses in Genesis chapter 10 provide further details about the descendants of these individuals and their subsequent migrations and settlements. It is important to note that the table of nations in Genesis chapter 10 highlights the diversity of human populations that emerged after the flood, tracing their roots back to Noah and his sons. The purpose of this chapter is to provide an account of the dispersion of humanity across the earth and to emphasize the interconnectedness of various nations and peoples. Genesis chapter 10 verse 7. And the sons of Cush, Seba, and Havilah, and Sabta, and Rama, and Sabteca, and the sons of Rama, Sheba, and Dedan. Genesis chapter 10 verse 7 is part of the genealogical record known as the Table of Nations, which appears in Genesis chapter 10. This chapter provides a list of the descendants of Noah's sons after the flood. It outlines the origins of different nations and peoples, tracing their lineages through various generations. In this particular verse, the focus is on the descendants of Cush, who was the son of Ham and grandson of Noah. Let's explore the individuals mentioned. Seba. Seba is believed to represent a people group associated with the region of modern-day Sudan. In some biblical passages, Seba is mentioned alongside Ethiopia, e.g., Psalm chapter 72 verse 10, indicating a possible connection. Havilah. Havilah is mentioned in various parts of the Bible, and there are different individuals with this name. In this context, Havilah is most likely a descendant of Cush, but specific details about him are not provided. Sabta. Like Havilah, Sabta is not extensively mentioned in the Bible. It is generally understood to represent a people or a region, but specific historical or geographical details are not given. Rama. Rama, also known as Rama son of Cush, is mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 27 verse 22 in the context of trade and commerce. Some scholars associate Rama with regions in southern Arabia or modern-day Yemen. Sabteca. Similar to the previous individuals, Sabteca is not explicitly mentioned elsewhere in the Bible, making it challenging to determine specific details about this descendant of Cush. Additionally, the verse mentions the sons of Rama. Sheba. Sheba, the son of Rama, is mentioned in various parts of the Bible. Sheba is associated with the region of southern Arabia and is known for its wealth and trade, including the famous Queen of Sheba's visit to King Solomon, 1 Kings chapter 10 verses 1 to 13. Dedan. Dedan is also mentioned in several biblical passages, including prophecies concerning nations. Dedan is believed to represent an Arabian tribe or region, possibly located in northern Arabia. The Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10 serves as a historical and genealogical record, providing a foundation for understanding the origins and dispersal of different nations and peoples. While some names in this verse may not be extensively mentioned elsewhere, they contribute to the broader narrative of human history as depicted in the Bible. It is important to note that interpretations of specific details, such as the exact locations and identities of these ancient peoples, may vary among scholars, and additional historical and archaeological studies are often undertaken to gain more insights into these ancient cultures. Genesis chapter 10 verse 8. And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. This verse is found within the genealogical account of Noah's descendants, known as the Table of Nations, which is recorded in Genesis chapter 10. In this chapter, the lineage of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, is detailed, along with the nations that descended from them. In Genesis chapter 10 verse 8, we encounter Nimrod, who is described as the son of Cush. Cush was one of the sons of Ham, who was one of Noah's 3 sons. The name Nimrod means rebel, or we will rebel, suggesting a negative connotation associated with him. Genesis chapter 10 verses 9 to 12 further expounds on Nimrod's character and accomplishments. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Ashur and builded Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth, and Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah, the same is a great city. Nimrod is portrayed as a significant figure in the early post-flood era, credited with establishing several cities in the land of Shinar, later known as Babylonia. He is described as a mighty hunter before the Lord, indicating his prowess in hunting. However, this description might also imply that he sought personal glory and power, possibly leading to rebellion against God's plans and authority. The cities mentioned in association with Nimrod, Babel, Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, were important centers of early civilization. Babel, in particular, would become infamous later in the Bible due to the story of the Tower of Babel, Genesis chapter 11 verses 1-9. It is worth noting that Nimrod's accomplishments in building cities and establishing a kingdom were not inherently condemned in Scripture. However, the emphasis on his reputation as a mighty hunter, and the subsequent development of Babel, which leads to the story of the Tower of Babel, suggests a trajectory of human ambition and pride that disregards God's authority. The mention of Nimrod in the Bible serves as a reminder of the consequences of human rebellion and the desire for self-glorification. It stands as a cautionary tale against seeking power and greatness apart from God's purposes and commands. Overall, Genesis chapter 10 verse 8 and the subsequent verses present Nimrod as a figure of significance in human history, highlighting the development of early civilizations, but also indicating the potential dangers of pride and rebellion against God. Genesis chapter 10 verse 9. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord. Context: Genesis chapter 10, also known as the Table of Nations, provides a genealogical account of Noah's descendants after the flood. It lists the descendants of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Nimrod is mentioned as the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham. Nimrod's identity: Nimrod is described as a mighty hunter before the Lord. The Hebrew word used for hunter, gibor, can also mean a valiant warrior or a powerful ruler. Nimrod's name is often associated with great strength, leadership, and rebellion. Historical significance: Nimrod is one of the prominent figures mentioned in the genealogical account, and his reputation extends beyond his hunting abilities. The verse implies that his fame as a mighty hunter spread widely, even to the point of being recognized as such before the Lord. Symbolism: Nimrod's character and actions are often seen as representing human rebellion against God. His reputation as a mighty hunter before the Lord can be interpreted as an act of pride and self-reliance. It suggests that Nimrod sought to establish his own fame and power, disregarding God's authority. Spiritual lessons: Genesis chapter 10 verse 9 serves as a cautionary reminder for believers. It highlights the dangers of seeking personal glory, power, and accomplishments apart from God's will. It reminds us to humbly acknowledge God as the ultimate source of strength and to align our pursuits with His purposes. Historical and cultural impact: Nimrod is traditionally associated with the founding of several ancient cities, including Babylon. His name and reputation have influenced various legends and myths throughout history. Additionally, Nimrod's role in the dispersion of people and the establishment of nations is significant in understanding early human history. Biblical allusion: the phrase, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord, has become an idiom or expression denoting someone who is skillful or influential in their field. It signifies a person who seeks greatness or fame for their own purposes rather than acknowledging God as the source of their abilities. It's important to note that while Genesis chapter 10 verse 9 provides insights into Nimrod's character and reputation, the Bible does not provide an extensive narrative or moral evaluation of his actions. Therefore, interpretations beyond the information given in the verse should be approached with caution and considered in light of other biblical principles and teachings. Genesis chapter 10 verse 10. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Genesis chapter 10 verse 10 is part of a larger section known as the Table of Nations, which appears in Genesis chapter 10. This chapter provides a genealogical account of the descendants of Noah's sons, specifically Shem, Ham, and Japheth, after the Great Flood. The verse in question focuses on the descendants of Ham, particularly the line of Cush. In Genesis chapter 10 verses 8–9, it is mentioned that Cush fathered Nimrod, who went on to become a mighty hunter and a significant figure in the early post-flood era. Nimrod founded several cities in the land of Shinar, which is the region generally associated with ancient Mesopotamia or modern-day Iraq. Genesis chapter 10 verse 10 lists 4 of these cities: Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. Babel, Babylon. This city is well known in ancient history and later biblical accounts. It would become a prominent city under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar and was associated with the Tower of Babel, a structure that people attempted to build to reach the heavens, as described in Genesis chapter 11 verses 1–9. Erech was an ancient city in Mesopotamia, located in present-day Iraq. It was an important urban center during the time of the Sumerians and is known for its historical significance and archaeological remains. Akkad, also known as Akkada, was the capital city of the Akkadian Empire. The Akkadian Empire, established by Sargon the Great, was the first known empire in history and dominated Mesopotamia in the 24th and 23rd centuries BCE. Calneh. The identification and precise location of Calneh have been the subject of debate among scholars. Various theories suggest it could be associated with the city of Nippur or Cullaba, both located in ancient Mesopotamia. This verse serves to establish the early origins of these cities and their founding by Nimrod, who is presented as a notable figure in the post-flood world. These cities would go on to play significant roles in the development of ancient civilization and exerted influence in the region for centuries to come. It is worth noting that the subsequent narrative in Genesis focuses on the Tower of Babel, which occurs in close proximity to these cities and has been traditionally associated with the city of Babel, Babylon. The story of the Tower of Babel describes how God scattered the people and confused their languages as a consequence of their pride and their desire to make a name for themselves. Overall, Genesis chapter 10 verse 10 provides a brief mention of the founding cities in the land of Shinar by Nimrod, setting the stage for the subsequent events described in the Bible. Genesis chapter 10 verse 11. Out of that land went forth Arose, and builded Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth, and Calah. Genesis chapter 10 verse 11, KJV. Genesis chapter 10 verse 11 is a verse from the chapter often referred to as the Table of Nations. This chapter provides a genealogical account of the descendants of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. In particular, this verse focuses on the descendants of Ham. The verse mentions Arose, who is believed to be the progenitor of the Assyrian people. It states that Arose went forth from a particular land, possibly referring to the region of Mesopotamia. Arose is credited with building several cities, including Nineveh, Rehoboth, and Calah. Nineveh was an ancient and prominent city in Assyria, located on the eastern bank of the Tigris River. It became the capital of the Assyrian Empire and played a significant role in biblical history. The prophet Jonah was sent by God to proclaim judgment against Nineveh, leading to its temporary repentance and salvation. Rehoboth. The exact location of the city Rehoboth mentioned in Genesis chapter 10 verse 11 is uncertain. Some scholars suggest it could be identified with a city named Rehoboth mentioned in Genesis chapter 36 verse 37. However, its precise location is not definitively known. Calah, also known as Kalu or Nimrud, was an ancient Assyrian city situated on the eastern bank of the Tigris River, near modern-day Mosul in Iraq. It served as a significant center of power and administration during the Assyrian Empire. Genesis chapter 10 verse 11 highlights the expansion and development of the descendants of Arose in the region of Mesopotamia. These cities became important centers of political, cultural, and military significance in ancient times. It is worth noting that the Bible's historical accounts and genealogies often provide valuable insights into the origins and development of various nations and civilizations. Genesis chapter 10, commonly known as the Table of Nations, is one such chapter that offers a glimpse into the early generations and migrations of humanity. Genesis chapter 10 verse 12. And Rezin between Nineveh and Calah, the same is a great city. Genesis chapter 10 verse 12 is part of a genealogical account known as the Table of Nations, which is found in Genesis chapter 10. This chapter provides a record of the descendants of Noah's sons after the flood and gives insight into the origins of various nations and peoples. In Genesis chapter 10 verse 11, we learn that Nimrod, a mighty hunter, began to be a mighty one in the earth. Following that verse, Genesis chapter 10 verse 12 provides a brief geographical reference regarding a city called Rezin. It states that Rezin was located between Nineveh and Calah and describes it as a great city. This verse gives us some geographical context within the ancient world. Nineveh and Calah were both significant cities in ancient Mesopotamia, situated in what is present-day Iraq. They were prominent centers of civilization in their time. Rezin, as mentioned in Genesis chapter 10 verse 12, is believed to have been another city in the vicinity, although it is not mentioned elsewhere in the Bible or in historical records. The purpose of including this detail in the genealogical account is to provide historical and geographical context to the narrative. It helps to situate the descendants of Noah within their respective regions and offers a glimpse into the development of early civilizations after the flood. While Genesis chapter 10 verse 12 does not convey a specific theological or moral message, it contributes to the overall historical account in the book of Genesis. It helps readers understand the expansion and dispersal of humanity after the flood, setting the stage for subsequent events and narratives in the biblical text. It's important to note that the Bible contains a wealth of information beyond individual verses, and exploring the surrounding context and related passages can provide a more comprehensive understanding of the message and themes presented. Genesis chapter 10 verse 13. And Mizraim begat Ludum, and Anamim, and Lehabim, and Naphtuhim. Genesis chapter 10 verse 13 is part of the genealogical account found in the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10. This chapter provides a record of the descendants of Noah's sons after the flood. It offers insights into the origins of various nations and peoples. In this specific verse, Mizraim is mentioned as the father of 4 sons, Ludum, Anamim, Lehabim, and Naphtuhim. Let's explore each of these names and their significance. Ludum. The name, Ludum, refers to a people group or region, often associated with the land of Egypt. The Ludum were likely a tribe or descendants of Mizraim who settled in the region known as Lower Egypt. They are also mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 27 verse 10 and Jeremiah chapter 46 verse 9. Anamim. The name, Anamim, is less clear in terms of its specific identification. It is believed to represent a people or a region, but there is limited information about them beyond this mention in Genesis. Some scholars speculate that they may have been a tribe in North Africa or an early African civilization. Lehabim. The term Lehabim is often associated with a people or a region, and it appears to be connected to Libya. The Lehabim could represent an early Libyan group or a neighboring people in North Africa. Again, like the Anamim, there is limited information available about them. Naphtuhim. The name Naphtuhim is associated with a people group descended from Mizraim. Their exact identification is uncertain, but some scholars believe they could be connected to the region of Egypt or even the island of Crete in the eastern Mediterranean. It's important to note that the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10 primarily serves to provide a historical and geographical context for the origins of various nations and peoples. While these names offer insights into the descendants of Mizraim, their exact identities and locations are not always fully clear due to the passage of time and limited historical records. Overall, Genesis chapter 10 verse 13 presents a snapshot of the descendants of Mizraim, who went on to form various nations and regions in the ancient world. The verse highlights the diversity of peoples and the way in which different civilizations and cultures emerged after the flood. Genesis chapter 10 verse 14. And Pathruzim, and Casluhim, out of whom came Philistim, and Caphtorim. Historical context. Genesis chapter 10 provides a genealogical account of Noah's descendants, listing the nations that descended from his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth. In verse 14, we encounter a mention of 4 names: Pathrusim, Casluhim, Philistim, Philistines, and Caphtorim. Pathrusim refers to a people group descended from Ham through his son Mizraim. Mizraim is commonly associated with ancient Egypt. Pathrusim likely refers to the inhabitants of the southern region of Egypt, known as Pathros. Casluhim represents another people group descended from Mizraim. Their exact identity is uncertain, but some scholars suggest they could be associated with a region in northeastern Egypt or possibly the Cretans. Philistines. The Philistines were a significant group in the ancient Near East, known for their conflicts with the Israelites. They originated from Casluhim and settled along the coastal region of Canaan, particularly in the 5 cities of Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. The Philistines played a prominent role in the Old Testament narratives, most notably in the stories of Samson, Samuel, and David. Caphtorim refers to a people group associated with the island of Crete. The Caphtorim are believed to have migrated from Crete and settled in the coastal regions, possibly displacing or intermingling with the earlier inhabitants. Some scholars propose a connection between the Caphtorim and the Philistines, suggesting that the Philistines may have originated from Crete. Significance: Genesis chapter 10 verse 14 provides valuable historical information about the origins and migrations of different nations in the ancient Near East. The mention of the Philistines is particularly significant because of their later interactions with the Israelites. The Philistines' presence and influence in Canaan had a profound impact on Israel's history and shaped the narratives found in the books of Samuel, Judges, and 1 Samuel. Lessons and applications. God's sovereignty in history. Genesis chapter 10 reminds us that God is sovereign over the rise and fall of nations. He guides the movements of people groups, shaping their histories according to his purposes. Cultural diversity. The diversity of nations and peoples mentioned in Genesis chapter 10 reflects God's creative design. It is a reminder that every culture and ethnicity has value in God's sight. God's redemptive plan. The Philistines, despite their historical conflicts with Israel, were not beyond God's redemptive reach. In the narratives of the Old Testament, we see individuals like Samson and David engaging with the Philistines, and God using these interactions to accomplish his purposes. The importance of historical context. Studying the historical context of biblical passages helps us gain a deeper understanding of the text and its relevance. It allows us to appreciate the Bible as a historical document, shedding light on the cultures and events of the time. Remember, a comprehensive Bible study would involve further exploration of related passages, historical records, commentaries, and cultural background. Genesis chapter 10 verse 15. And Canaan begat Sidon his firstborn, and Heth. Context. Genesis chapter 10 provides a genealogy of the nations that descended from Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. In this particular verse, the focus is on the descendants of Ham, specifically Canaan, who is mentioned as the father of Sidon and Heth. Canaan was one of the sons of Ham and a grandson of Noah. The Canaanites settled in the region that became known as Canaan, which included the land of Israel. The Canaanites played a significant role in the biblical narrative, interacting with the Israelites throughout their history. Sidon was the firstborn son of Canaan. The city of Sidon, located on the Mediterranean coast, became one of the prominent Canaanite cities. It was known for its seafaring and trade activities. Heth, also known as Hittites, was another descendant of Canaan. The Hittites were a people group who inhabited the region of modern-day Turkey and Syria. They became a significant power in the ancient Near East and interacted with various biblical figures, including Abraham and Esau. Spiritual significance. While Genesis chapter 10 primarily focuses on the genealogy of nations, it also lays the groundwork for future biblical narratives. The mention of Canaan, Sidon, and Heth foreshadows the interactions and conflicts that the Israelites would have with these people groups in the years to come. Lessons from Genesis chapter 10 verse 15. This verse reminds us of the historical and genealogical context of the Bible. It highlights the diversity of nations and the interconnectedness of various people groups. It also serves as a reminder that God's redemptive plan encompasses all of humanity, as seen through the inclusion of different nations and cultures in the biblical narrative. Overall, Genesis chapter 10 verse 15 provides a glimpse into the lineage of Canaan, highlighting the important role played by the Canaanites, Sidon, and Heth in biblical history. It serves as a reminder of the diversity and interconnectedness of the nations and God's redemptive plan for all people. Genesis chapter 10 verse 16. And the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgashite. Genesis chapter 10 verse 16, KJV. This verse is a brief mention of three different groups of people: the Jebusites, the Amorites, and the Girgashites. These were ancient Canaanite tribes that inhabited the land of Canaan. The Jebusites were known for their association with Jerusalem. They lived in the region around the city and occupied the area until it was captured by King David and became the capital of Israel. 2 Samuel chapter 5 verses 6 to 9. Jerusalem was originally called Jebus, named after the Jebusites. The Amorites were a prominent group of people who inhabited various parts of Canaan, particularly the region of the hill country. They were known for their city-states, such as Hebron, which Abraham purchased as a burial site for Sarah, Genesis chapter 23 verses 17 to 20. Later in history, the Israelites faced fierce opposition from the Amorites when they entered the Promised Land, Numbers chapter 21 verses 21 to 35. The Girgashites, also known as the Girgashites, were another Canaanite tribe. They dwelled in the land of Canaan, specifically in the area around Mount Hermon and the northern part of the Jordan River. The Bible doesn't provide much information about the Girgashites beyond their inclusion in the Table of Nations. Overall, Genesis chapter 10 verse 16 serves as a record of the different Canaanite tribes and their dwelling places in the ancient land of Canaan. These tribes played significant roles in the history of the Israelites as they established themselves in the Promised Land, fulfilling God's covenant with Abraham and his descendants. Genesis chapter 10 verse 17. And the Hivite, and the Arkite, and the Sinite. Context: Genesis chapter 10, also known as the Table of Nations, provides a genealogy of the descendants of Noah's three sons after the flood. It highlights the origins of various nations and peoples that came from them. The Hivites. The Hivites were one of the Canaanite tribes inhabiting the land of Canaan. They are mentioned multiple times in the Old Testament, particularly in relation to the conquest and settlement of the Promised Land by the Israelites. The Hivites were one of the 7 nations that inhabited the land before the Israelites arrived. The Arkites. The Arkites were a people group that resided in the city of Arka, which was located in the region of Phoenicia, modern-day Lebanon. They are mentioned in the context of the descendants of Canaan. The Sinites. The Sinites were a people group whose exact identity is uncertain. Some scholars believe they were associated with the city of Sinai or Sennar in modern-day Lebanon. Others suggest a possible connection to the land of Sinim mentioned in Isaiah chapter 49 verse 12, which may refer to a region in the east, possibly China. However, due to the limited information available, it is challenging to establish a definitive identification. Significance: Genesis chapter 10 verse 17 provides a glimpse into the diverse array of nations and peoples that emerged after the flood and traces their origins. It reflects God's plan for humanity to populate the earth and showcases the fulfillment of his promise to Noah to replenish the earth with descendants. Application: while the specific details of these peoples and nations might seem distant and unfamiliar, the broader lesson from this passage is the recognition of God's sovereign work in history and his concern for all people groups. It reminds us that God's redemptive plan encompasses the entire world, and he desires for all nations to come to know him. Further study: to gain a deeper understanding of the historical and cultural context of Genesis chapter 10 verse 17, you may consider exploring other resources such as commentaries, Bible dictionaries, or archaeological references that shed light on the identities and significance of the Hivites, Arkites, and Sinites. Remember, studying the Bible in depth involves exploring various perspectives, consulting reliable sources, and seeking guidance from the Holy Spirit. Genesis chapter 10 verse 18. And the Arvadite, and the Zemarite, and the Hamathite, and afterward were the families of the Canaanites spread abroad. Genesis chapter 10, also known as the Table of Nations, provides a genealogical account of the descendants of Noah after the flood. It outlines the origins and dispersal of different nations and peoples. Genesis chapter 10 verse 18 specifically mentions three groups: the Arvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hamathites, and it also indicates the subsequent spreading of the families of the Canaanites. To understand this verse better, let's explore the historical and geographical context. Arvadites. Arvad was an island city-state located in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of present-day Syria. The Arvadites were descendants of Canaan, the son of Ham and grandson of Noah, Genesis chapter 10 verse 6. Zemarites. Zemar, also known as Sumer, was an ancient city in modern-day Lebanon. The Zemarites were also descendants of Canaan, Genesis chapter 10 verse 18. Hamathites. Hamath was a region and city situated in present-day Syria. The Hamathites were descendants of Canaan as well. The mention of these specific groups highlights the descendants of Canaan and their various locations during that period. Furthermore, the verse concludes by stating that the families of the Canaanites were spread abroad. The Canaanites were a significant ethnic group inhabiting the land of Canaan, which corresponds to present-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and parts of Jordan and Syria. Their dispersal played a role in shaping the future interactions and conflicts with the Israelites, as documented throughout the Bible. This verse, within the broader context of Genesis chapter 10, emphasizes the diverse origins and spreading of different nations and peoples after the flood. It highlights the descendants of Canaan and their geographical locations, setting the stage for the historical narratives that follow in subsequent chapters of the Bible. Genesis chapter 10 verse 19. And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon, as thou comest to Gerar, unto Gaza, as thou goest, unto Sodom, and Gomorrah, and Admah, and Zeboim, even unto Lasha. Genesis chapter 10 verse 19 is part of the Table of Nations, which is found in Genesis chapter 10. This chapter provides a genealogical account of the descendants of Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It describes how these lineages spread and settled in different regions of the world. In Genesis chapter 10 verse 19, the verse focuses on the territory occupied by the Canaanites. It delineates the boundaries of the Canaanite territory, mentioning various cities and regions. Let's break it down. Sidon. Sidon was a significant Phoenician city located on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea. It was renowned for its trade and maritime activities. Sidon was the northernmost city mentioned in the verse. Gerar. Gerar was a city located in the region of Philistia. It is mentioned in the Bible in connection with Abraham and Isaac. Abraham sojourned in Gerar and encountered Abimelech, the king of Gerar, Genesis chapter 20. Later, Isaac also settled in Gerar and faced a similar situation with Abimelech, Genesis chapter 26. Gaza. Gaza was another important city in the Philistine region. It was located on the coast and served as a significant trading hub and fortress city throughout history. Gaza is mentioned in various biblical accounts, including the story of Samson. Sodom and Gomorrah. These cities are infamous for their wickedness and destruction. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is found in Genesis chapter 19. The Lord decided to destroy these cities due to their sinful behavior, but he saved Lot and his family before raining down judgment on them. Admah and Zeboim. These cities are mentioned alongside Sodom and Gomorrah in Deuteronomy chapter 29 verse 23. They were also destroyed along with Sodom and Gomorrah as a result of their wickedness. Lasha. Lasha is less well known and not mentioned elsewhere in the Bible. Its exact location remains uncertain. Overall, Genesis chapter 10 verse 19 provides geographical references to the Canaanite territory, highlighting various cities and regions occupied by them. These locations hold significance throughout the Bible, as they were settings for important events and encounters involving biblical figures. Genesis chapter 10 verse 20. These are the sons of Ham, after their families, after their tongues, in their countries, and in their nations. This verse is part of the genealogical account found in Genesis chapter 10, commonly known as the Table of Nations. This chapter provides a record of the descendants of Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, after the global flood. In this particular verse, the focus is on the descendants of Ham. Ham was one of Noah's sons and his descendants are traced through various lineages. The verse mentions that the sons of Ham are divided into families, with their own distinct languages, countries, and nations. The Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10 serves as a historical and genealogical account, showing how humanity multiplied and spread across different regions and nations. It highlights the diverse origins of various nations and provides a framework for understanding the origins of different people groups. Genesis chapter 10 verse 20 emphasizes the diversity of languages, countries, and nations that emerged from the descendants of Ham. This diversity reflects the fulfillment of God's command to Noah and his sons to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Genesis chapter 9 verse 1. It shows that humanity not only survived the flood but also thrived and spread across the earth. The mention of different languages in Genesis chapter 10 verse 20 is significant because it points to the event known as the Tower of Babel, which occurs in the subsequent chapter, Genesis chapter 11. In Genesis chapter 11, we read about how the people of the earth sought to build a tower that would reach the heavens, defying God's command to disperse and fill the earth. As a result, God confused their languages and scattered them across the earth. Genesis chapter 11 verses 1 to 9. This event led to the formation of distinct language groups and the subsequent migration and establishment of different nations. Genesis chapter 10 verse 20 serves as a reminder of God's sovereignty and his plan for humanity's diversity and multiplication. It shows that while we may come from different backgrounds, languages, and nations, we are all part of the human family. As believers, this verse can encourage us to appreciate and respect the diversity of cultures, languages, and people groups, recognizing that God's purpose extends beyond any particular nation or group. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 10 verse 20 is a brief verse within the Table of Nations, highlighting the diversity of languages, countries, and nations that emerged from the descendants of Ham. It points to the fulfillment of God's command to multiply and fill the earth and reminds us of the importance of recognizing and appreciating the diversity within the human family. Genesis chapter 10 verse 21. Unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder, even to him were children born. Genesis chapter 10 verse 21 is part of the genealogy or Table of Nations found in Genesis chapter 10. This chapter lists the descendants of Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These descendants eventually populated various regions and nations of the ancient world. In this particular verse, the focus is on Shem, who is mentioned as the father of all the children of Eber. Eber is an important figure in the biblical narrative because his name is associated with the Hebrew people. The term, Hebrew, is derived from the name Eber, and it eventually became the designation for the Israelites, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This verse also mentions Japheth as Shem's older brother. This reference to Japheth's age is significant in terms of birth order and the subsequent lineage of nations that descended from Japheth and Shem. The genealogy presented in Genesis chapter 10 reflects the understanding of ancient Hebrews regarding the origins of nations and their relationship to one another. It provides a framework for understanding the diversity and interconnectedness of humanity as they saw it. By studying these genealogies, scholars and readers can trace the historical and geographical roots of various nations and peoples. Furthermore, these genealogies lay the foundation for the subsequent narratives found in the Bible, particularly those concerning the Israelites, their ancestors, and the covenant God established with them. In summary, Genesis chapter 10 verse 21 is a verse within the Table of Nations, providing a genealogical account of the descendants of Noah. It highlights the relationship between Shem and Japheth and mentions Eber, whose name is linked to the Hebrew people. This verse serves as a starting point for tracing the origins of various nations and peoples in the biblical narrative. Genesis chapter 10 verse 22. The children of Shem, Elam, and Arshur, and Arphaxad, and Lud, and Aram. Genesis chapter 10 is commonly known as the Table of Nations, which provides a genealogical account of the descendants of Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Genesis chapter 10 verse 22 specifically focuses on the descendants of Shem. Let's examine the context and significance of this verse within the larger narrative of the Bible. The children of Shem. Genesis chapter 10 verse 22 begins by mentioning the children of Shem. Shem was one of Noah's sons and the father of several nations. The verse indicates that Shem had 5 sons: Elam, Arshur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. These names represent various ethnic groups or nations that trace their ancestry back to Shem. Elam refers to a historical region located in what is now southwestern Iran. The Elamites were descendants of Shem and are mentioned in various parts of the Old Testament. Arshur is associated with the Assyrian Empire, which flourished in the ancient Near East. The Assyrians, descendants of Shem, established a powerful and influential empire centered in Mesopotamia. Arphaxad is considered the ancestor of the Hebrews or Israelites. He is an important figure in biblical genealogy, as he is the direct ancestor of Abraham, who plays a significant role in God's redemptive plan. Lud is believed to represent a people group associated with the region of Lydia in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. The descendants of Lud likely settled in that area. Aram refers to the region of Syria and is associated with various Aramean kingdoms mentioned in the Bible. The Arameans were one of the dominant groups in the ancient Near East. The purpose of the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10 is to provide a genealogical record that establishes the origins of different nations and peoples. It demonstrates how all humanity descended from Noah and his 3 sons after the Great Flood. These genealogical accounts also set the stage for the later narrative of God's redemptive plan, which focuses primarily on the descendants of Shem, specifically the Hebrews and ultimately the Messiah, Jesus Christ. While Genesis chapter 10 verse 22 may appear as a straightforward list of names, it holds historical and cultural significance, connecting different nations and peoples to their common ancestry. Genesis chapter 10 verse 23. And the children of Aram, Uzed, and Hul, and Gether, and Mash. Genesis chapter 10 verse 23 is a part of the genealogical account known as the Table of Nations. In this chapter, the descendants of Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, are listed. The verse specifically focuses on the descendants of Aram, who was one of Shem's sons. Aram, also known as Arami, was a descendant of Shem. He is considered the progenitor of the Arameans, an ancient Semitic people who inhabited the region corresponding to present-day Syria and Mesopotamia. Uzed was one of the sons of Aram. The name Uzed appears elsewhere in the Bible, referring to different individuals or locations. In the book of Job, for example, Uzed is the name of a region where Job is said to have lived. Hul is another son of Aram mentioned in this verse. The biblical text doesn't provide much information about Hul or his descendants, and their historical significance is relatively unknown. Gether is listed as another son of Aram. Similar to Hul, there isn't much additional information available about Gether or his descendants. Mash is the last son mentioned in this verse. Again, the biblical account doesn't elaborate further on Mash or his descendants. It's worth noting that the purpose of the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10 is to provide a broad overview of the various nations and peoples that emerged from Noah's descendants. This genealogical record helps establish a historical context for the subsequent narratives found in the Bible. While Genesis chapter 10 verse 23 may not provide extensive details about the individuals mentioned, it contributes to the overall picture of the diverse nations and peoples that emerged from the sons of Noah and their descendants. By examining other passages in the Bible and historical records, we can gain a deeper understanding of these people and their significance in biblical and ancient Near Eastern history. Genesis chapter 10 verse 24. And Arphaxad begat Salah, and Salah begat Eber. This verse is a part of the genealogical account found in Genesis chapter 10, often referred to as the Table of Nations. It provides a lineage of descendants from Noah, tracing the origins of various nations and peoples. In this particular verse, the focus is on the descendants of Shem, one of Noah's sons. Arphaxad is listed as the son of Shem, and Salah is listed as the son of Arphaxad. Finally, Eber is mentioned as the son of Salah. It is important to note that this genealogy serves to establish the historical background and lineage of various nations. These names are significant in the context of the Hebrew people, as they trace their ancestry back to Eber. The Hebrew word, Hebrew, Ivri, is derived from the name Eber. The genealogy found in Genesis chapter 10 verse 24 also sets the stage for the subsequent narrative in the book of Genesis, particularly the story of Abraham. Abraham, who is later introduced in Genesis chapter 11, is a descendant of Eber. He plays a pivotal role in biblical history as the father of the Hebrew people and the recipient of God's covenant. In summary, Genesis chapter 10 verse 24 is a verse that establishes a lineage within the Table of Nations, tracing the descendants of Shem through Arphaxad, Salah, and ultimately Eber. It sets the foundation for the subsequent narrative of Abraham and the Hebrew people in the Bible. Genesis chapter 10 verse 25. And unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Historical context: Genesis chapter 10 is commonly known as the Table of Nations, which lists the descendants of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. This chapter provides a genealogical account of the nations that emerged from these 3 sons. The descendants of Shem. In Genesis chapter 10 verse 21, it is mentioned that Shem is the ancestor of all the children of Eber. Eber is an important figure in this genealogy because his lineage leads to the Hebrew people, from whom Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Israel, would descend. Eber and his sons. Genesis chapter 10 verse 25 focuses on Eber's 2 sons, Peleg and Joktan. Peleg's name is derived from the Hebrew word, pelag, which means, to divide. The verse mentions that during Peleg's days, the earth was divided. This division is often associated with the separation of people and languages that took place at the Tower of Babel incident, Genesis chapter 11 verses 1 to 9. The division of the earth, the phrase, the earth was divided, has been interpreted in different ways. Some scholars believe it refers to the division of the continents during the time of Peleg, indicating a period of tectonic activity or landmass separation. Others understand it to signify the division of people groups, leading to the dispersion of humanity across the earth. Linguistic and geographical implications: if we consider the Tower of Babel incident as the dividing point, it suggests that the confusion of languages led to the subsequent scattering of people across different regions. The geographical and linguistic diversity we see in the world today may be traced back to this event. The prominence of Joktan. The verse also mentions Joktan, who is Peleg's brother. Joktan's descendants are listed in Genesis chapter 10 verses 26 to 29, and they are associated with the Arab peoples. Joktan's name means small or diminutive, which might suggest that his lineage was not as influential or widespread as Peleg's. Nevertheless, it emphasizes the diversity of nations that emerged from Noah's descendants. Spiritual significance: While the verse primarily focuses on the historical and genealogical aspects, it also carries spiritual implications. The division mentioned in this verse reminds us of the consequences of human rebellion against God, leading to separation, confusion, and dispersion. It highlights the importance of unity and the need for reconciliation among all people. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 10 verse 25 provides a brief account of Eber's sons, Peleg and Joktan, with a reference to the division that occurred during Peleg's days. This verse helps us understand the historical and genealogical context of the descendants of Shem, and it hints at the subsequent dispersion of humanity across different regions. It reminds us of the consequences of rebellion and emphasizes the significance of unity and reconciliation. Genesis chapter 10 verse 26. And Joktan begat Almodad, and Sheleph, and Hazarmaveth, and Jerah. Context: Genesis chapter 10, also known as the Table of Nations, provides a genealogical account of the descendants of Noah after the Great Flood. It traces the origins of various nations and peoples, highlighting their different languages, lands, and clans. Verse 26 is a part of this genealogical record. Joktan. Joktan was one of the sons of Eber, who was a descendant of Shem, Noah's son. The descendants of Joktan formed numerous Arabian tribes. Joktan's genealogy is given in Genesis chapter 10 verses 25 to 29, listing several of his sons. Almodad, Sheleph, Hazarmaveth, and Jerah. These are the 4 sons of Joktan mentioned in verse 26. They represent various Arabian tribes or clans that descended from Joktan. The meanings of their names are not explicitly provided in the Bible, and there is limited information about these specific tribes in subsequent biblical accounts. Significance: while the significance of these individual names and tribes may not be explicitly clear from this verse alone, the inclusion of their names in the genealogical record serves to establish the lineage and descendants of Joktan, connecting them to the broader narrative of human history. Historical and cultural background: to gain a deeper understanding of the significance of these names and tribes, it can be helpful to study the broader historical and cultural context of the ancient Near East. However, since the biblical text does not provide extensive information about these particular tribes, their specific historical and cultural backgrounds remain somewhat elusive. Themes and lessons: while this verse primarily serves as a record of genealogy and ancestry, it highlights the diversity of human descendants and the various tribes and nations that emerged after the flood. It emphasizes the fulfillment of God's promise to multiply humanity through Noah's descendants, as mentioned in Genesis chapter 9 verse 1. Overall, Genesis chapter 10 verse 26 is a small part of the genealogical record in the Table of Nations, tracing the descendants of Joktan, who formed various Arabian tribes. While it may not offer substantial theological or moral teachings on its own, it contributes to the larger narrative of human history as recorded in the Bible. Genesis chapter 10 verse 27. And Hadoram, and Uzal, and Diklah. Context and background: Genesis chapter 10 is commonly known as the Table of Nations, which provides a genealogy of the descendants of Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It outlines the various nations and peoples that descended from them. Genesis chapter 10 verse 27 specifically refers to the descendants of Joktan, who was one of the sons of Eber and a descendant of Shem. Hadoram. Hadoram is mentioned in this verse as one of the sons or descendants of Joktan. The exact identification of Hadoram and the location associated with him are not clear in the biblical text. However, some scholars suggest that Hadoram could be associated with Hadramaut, a region in southern Arabia. Uzal. Uzal is mentioned as another son or descendant of Joktan. Uzal is also difficult to identify precisely, but some scholars propose that it may refer to a place called Udhail, or Orsan, in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. Diklah. Diklah is the third name mentioned in Genesis chapter 10 verse 27 as a son or descendant of Joktan. Similar to the previous 2 names, the exact location associated with Diklah is uncertain. Various suggestions have been made, including a possible connection with a region called Dorak in Yemen. Significance and lessons. While the specific details regarding Hadoram, Uzal, and Dikla are uncertain, their mention in the Table of Nations highlights the diversity and dispersion of human populations after the flood. The passage emphasizes the proliferation of various nations and peoples, each with their own unique identities and locations. This verse reminds us of the richness of human history and the vastness of God's creation. It reflects God's plan to scatter humanity and establish diverse cultures and nations across the earth. Additionally, this passage reminds us of the historical context of the Bible. It provides a glimpse into the ancient world and the people who populated it. While specific details may be difficult to ascertain, it encourages us to appreciate the historical and cultural background of biblical texts. Overall, Genesis chapter 10 verse 27 is a small part of a larger genealogical account, which demonstrates the intricate tapestry of humanity and the vastness of God's creation. It invites us to reflect on the diversity of cultures and nations and recognize the sovereign hand of God in shaping human history. Genesis chapter 10 verse 28. And Obal, and Abimael, and Sheba. Context: Genesis chapter 10, also known as the Table of Nations, provides a genealogy of Noah's descendants after the flood. It lists the names of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their descendants who populated the earth. Genesis chapter 10 verse 28 specifically focuses on the descendants of Joktan, a son of Eber and a descendant of Shem. Obal is mentioned in this verse as one of the sons or descendants of Joktan. Not much is known about Obal, as the Bible does not provide any further details about him. This mention signifies his existence and his place within the genealogy of Joktan. Abimael is another son or descendant of Joktan mentioned in Genesis chapter 10 verse 28. Like Obal, the Bible does not provide any specific information about Abimael beyond this genealogical mention. Sheba is also listed in this verse as one of the descendants of Joktan. Sheba has a more significant role in biblical history, as it refers to both a person and a region. The region of Sheba is often associated with modern-day Yemen and Ethiopia. The Queen of Sheba, mentioned in the Old Testament, visited King Solomon to test his wisdom, 1 Kings chapter 10 verses 1 to 13. Additionally, the prophecy in Isaiah chapter 60 verse 6 speaks of the wealth of Sheba being brought to Jerusalem. Genealogical significance. Genesis chapter 10 verse 28 provides a glimpse into the descendants of Joktan, who is part of the lineage leading to Abraham. This genealogy is significant because it establishes the link between Noah's descendants and the people who eventually populated various regions of the world. Historical and cultural relevance. Studying genealogies like the one in Genesis chapter 10 verse 28 helps us understand the historical and cultural context of biblical times. It provides a framework for tracing the ancestry of different nations and tribes. While some of these names may not have prominent roles in biblical narratives, they are important for understanding the diversity and spread of humanity after the flood. It's worth noting that while this verse provides historical and genealogical information, its immediate significance may not be as apparent as other biblical passages. However, when studying the Bible, it is important to consider the broader narrative and themes that connect these genealogical accounts to the overarching story of God's plan for humanity's redemption through Jesus Christ. Genesis chapter 10 verse 29. And Ophir, and Havilah, and Jobab, all these were the sons of Joktan. Context. Genesis chapter 10, commonly known as the Table of Nations, provides a genealogy of the descendants of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It highlights the origin of various nations and peoples. Genesis chapter 10 verse 29 specifically focuses on the sons of Joktan, who was a descendant of Shem. Joktan was one of the sons of Eber and the grandson of Shem. The descendants of Joktan are mentioned in Genesis chapter 10 verses 26 to 29. They are associated with specific territories and regions. Ophir is mentioned as one of the sons of Joktan. The location of Ophir is uncertain, but it is generally believed to be a place known for its wealth and abundance of resources, including gold and other precious metals. In the Bible, Ophir is frequently associated with the trade of valuable goods, e.g., 1 Kings chapter 9 verse 28, 10:11, 22:48. Havilah. Havilah is also listed as a son of Joktan. The name Havilah appears multiple times in the Bible, referring to different locations. In this context, it is likely referring to a region in southern Arabia, which was known for its rich resources, including gold, bdellium, and onyx. Genesis chapter 2 verses 11 to 12. Jobab. Jobab is the final son of Joktan mentioned in Genesis chapter 10 verse 29. Not much is known about Jobab or his descendants beyond this verse. Significance. Genesis chapter 10 verse 29 highlights the descendants of Joktan, tracing their lineage and associating them with specific regions known for their wealth and resources. The mention of Ophir and Havilah, in particular, suggests a connection to trade and prosperity. Spiritual lessons. While the focus of this verse is primarily on historical and genealogical information, we can draw a few spiritual lessons from it. First, it reminds us of the diversity of humanity and the various nations and peoples that emerged from Noah's descendants. It is a reminder that we are all part of one human family, despite our differences. Second, it emphasizes the provision of God in different regions and the blessings of resources that He has bestowed upon various lands. It encourages us to acknowledge God as the ultimate provider of all good things. Third, it reminds us that God's plan and purposes extend beyond any one individual or family. He works through generations and nations to accomplish His will. Overall, Genesis chapter 10 verse 29 provides a glimpse into the descendants of Joktan and their association with regions known for their wealth and resources. While it may not hold significant theological implications, it contributes to our understanding of the genealogical history and the diverse origins of different peoples. Genesis chapter 10 verse 30. And their dwelling was from Mesha, as thou goest unto Sephar a mount of the east. Genesis chapter 10 provides a genealogy of the nations that descended from Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. This particular verse focuses on the descendants of Joktan, who was a son of Eber and a descendant of Shem. Historical context. Genesis chapter 10, also known as the Table of Nations, is an essential chapter that provides insights into the early dispersion of humanity after the flood. It highlights the origins of various nations and ethnic groups, emphasizing their common ancestry. The descendants of Joktan. Genesis chapter 10 verse 30 mentions the descendants of Joktan. It states that their dwelling was from Mesha to Sephar, a mountain in the east. The specific locations mentioned in this verse are not clearly identifiable today, and their precise locations have been a subject of debate among scholars. Dwelling from Mesha to Sephar. The phrase, their dwelling, suggests that Joktan's descendants occupied or settled in the region between Mesha and Sephar. However, the exact geographical locations of these places are uncertain. Some interpretations propose that Mesha refers to a region in southern Arabia, while Sephar may refer to a mountain or region in the east, possibly in the Arabian Peninsula. The significance. While the exact geographical references are not definitively known, the passage serves to emphasize the dispersion and diversity of humanity across various regions of the world. It underscores the fulfillment of God's command to Noah and his sons to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Genesis chapter 9 verse 1. It showcases the expansive nature of God's plan for humanity. Lessons for today. Unity in diversity. The Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10 reminds us of the diverse tapestry of humanity. It highlights the beauty and value of different cultures, languages, and ethnicities. It encourages us to celebrate our differences while recognizing our shared humanity. God's sovereignty. As we observe the spread of nations and the movements of people groups in Genesis chapter 10, we see God's sovereignty at work. He orchestrates the course of history and the distribution of peoples according to His divine plan. The Great Commission. The dispersion of nations in Genesis chapter 10 foreshadows the Great Commission given by Jesus in Matthew chapter 28 verses 19 to 20. We are called to go into all nations and make disciples, sharing the good news of salvation with people from every tribe, tongue, and nation. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 10 verse 30 highlights the descendants of Joktan and their dwelling from Mesha to Safar, showcasing the diverse dispersion of humanity. While the specific locations mentioned may be uncertain, the passage serves as a reminder of God's plan for humanity spread across the earth and the value of unity in diversity. Genesis chapter 10 verse 31. These are the sons of Shem, after their families, after their tongues, in their lands, after their nations. Context: Genesis chapter 10, also known as the Table of Nations, provides a genealogical account of the descendants of Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The chapter highlights how the nations and peoples of the earth originated from these three patriarchs. Genesis chapter 10 verse 31 specifically focuses on the descendants of Shem. The sons of Shem. Shem was one of Noah's three sons and the ancestor of the Semitic peoples, including the Israelites. The verse mentions that the descendants of Shem are divided into different families, each with its own language and land. This highlights the diversity of nations and languages that emerged from the lineage of Shem. Importance of lineage. The genealogical record in Genesis chapter 10 demonstrates God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promise to multiply the descendants of Noah and repopulate the earth after the flood. It also establishes the historical and ethnic background of various nations, tracing their origins back to these three primary ancestors. Unity and diversity. While Genesis chapter 10 emphasizes the diversity among the nations, it also reveals a common ancestry, emphasizing the unity of all humanity. Despite the dispersion of people into different lands and the development of distinct cultures and languages, they are still connected through their shared lineage. This passage reminds us of our common humanity and the value of recognizing and respecting the diversity among different nations and peoples. God's sovereignty and purpose. The detailed account of nations and their origins in Genesis chapter 10 demonstrates God's sovereignty and his divine plan for human history. The dispersion of peoples across the earth was not a random event but part of God's ordained purposes. It sets the stage for subsequent events and the unfolding of God's redemptive plan through the nation of Israel. Application. Genesis chapter 10 verse 31 encourages us to appreciate the rich tapestry of human diversity and recognize that all people, regardless of their nationality, language, or cultural background, share a common ancestry. As believers, we should embrace unity in Christ while celebrating the uniqueness of different cultures. It reminds us of our responsibility to love and respect people from all nations and to engage in cross-cultural relationships and missions. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 10 verse 31 highlights the diverse origins of nations and languages from the descendants of Shem. It underscores the unity and diversity of humanity, showcases God's sovereignty in human history, and calls us to embrace and respect the various cultures and peoples of the world. Genesis chapter 10 verse 32. These are the families of the sons of Noah, after their generations, in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. Genesis chapter 10, often referred to as the Table of Nations, provides a genealogical account of the descendants of Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. This chapter reveals how the nations and people groups spread throughout the earth after the flood. In Genesis chapter 10 verse 32, the verse serves as a concluding statement for the chapter, summarizing the content and emphasizing the dispersion of the nations. It affirms that the families of Noah's sons formed distinct nations and were divided throughout the earth. This verse carries significant implications for biblical and historical understanding. It sheds light on the origins of different ethnic groups and their diverse cultures. The dispersion of these nations can be traced through various historical and archaeological records, providing insight into the development of civilizations and societies. Furthermore, This verse emphasizes the fulfillment of God's command to Noah and his sons in Genesis chapter 9 verse 1, where God instructed him to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. The diverse nations and people groups that emerged following the flood exemplify God's desire for humanity to populate and inhabit the earth. From a theological standpoint, this verse underscores the sovereignty of God in orchestrating human history. God's plan for humanity's dispersion and multiplication after the flood was carried out through the establishment of various nations and cultures. Overall, Genesis chapter 10 verse 32 serves as a pivotal verse in understanding the post-flood narrative, the origins of nations, and the fulfillment of God's command to Noah and his sons. It provides valuable historical and theological insights, reminding us of God's sovereign hand in shaping human history.